We are a group of friends, bound by our appreciation for liberty and good podcasting. Free-minded thinkers from all walks of life, our values come together with one accord to discuss the common culture and news of the day, along with whatever random crap is going on in our lives. Welcome to the Union of the Unknowns.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Union of the Unknowns. Today, I will be your host, Ashley Think Change Repeat, and I have with me fellow unknown, Terry Canary. How you doing, Terry? Welcome to another episode of the Union of the Unknowns. I am your host today, Ashley Think Change Repeat, and with me I have my fellow unknown, Terry Canary, and as Keel would say, the Volcano Buster. How you doing, Terry?
Hello, I'm doing very well, Ash. Thank you for asking.
Alrighty, great. So today we have said that we're gonna have a free-form conversation. We're gonna talk about whatever, but one of the things that we wanted to kick it off with is just some general health discussion, and you are going to take us into that and kick us off. So go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, we didn't really have much of an agenda for this show, but we thought this is something we have in common, because I think we're thought of amongst our Discord buddies as two of the kind of natural health people who are very into this topic for reasons I'll probably get into in a minute. So, and kind of prompted as well by, I had some routine blood tests done recently, which I might talk about later because I've got nothing to hide. And Ash might have some comments on some of them. But I thought we could start off by just sort of talking about how we got into the more natural approach to health. I prefer to think of it as natural health rather than alternative health, because I like to think of mainstream health as more alternative health, because I don't think it's the real health. So how does that sound with you, Ash? I'll talk about my history, and then maybe you could talk a bit about you as well.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, and that I think that's interesting. An interesting thing to discuss for any of us who are trying to have a health experience and take a natural path. And there's a lot of complications to that in today's day and time. So there's a lot to say on that.
Yes. So with me, I think I was always, regular viewers and listeners won't be surprised to hear that I'm a bit of a skeptic at heart. Anyway, I'm very skeptical about kind of mainstream advice, and I've always sort of tried to think for myself and take a different view. But a big turning point for me was, some of you will know that my wife Fiona has got MS, multiple sclerosis. She was diagnosed back in 2009. I had to look it up because it seems like a lot longer than that that we've been tussling with this. And you know, she had a lot of symptoms beforehand, and she started falling over quite regularly, which is, for anyone listening, if that starts happening to you, it's one of the key indicators that we've got some neurological problem going on. So we ended up going to see. There's a long story about the diagnosis, but eventually a neurologist said that, you know, after some tests, which were very invasive and possibly not terribly useful, that she had multiple sclerosis. And so I was with her at the time in the consulting room, and I said, you know, are there any diet and lifestyle interventions that could help? And the neurologist just said no, dismissed it out of hand. And he was kind of typical doctor, very sort of arrogant, thinking, you know, what a stupid question. Obviously, that's not going to work. So basically, his advice was, she's just going to get worse and worse, and increasing disability and an early death. And I immediately thought, I don't believe this. I don't believe there's nothing you can do about this at all. So Fiona was quite poorly at the time, and got a lot worse very quickly, and she ended up bedridden, had to give up work. And so it was left to me. So I looked into it, and I found, of course, there were loads of books and research saying that you could do something about this, with sort of dietary interventions, lifestyle interventions, supplements. And the thing about MS is it's kind of, we realized in the end that it was kind of like a waste paper basket diagnosis. It covers a lot of different scenarios of people, and it basically means it's more, the name actually means that you've just got plaques on your nerves, where you're losing myelin, which is kind of like the insulation for the nerves. So you're getting this demyelination, and in multiple places, and that's what the name means. So it doesn't actually tell you what's really going on, which is again typical of mainstream medicine. They like to, and neurologists in particular have this thing that Fiona and I like to quote, where they do diagnose and adiose. So they do all these tests on you just so they can put a name on something, and then they send you out the door and say, right, get on with it. You just there's no hope for you, really. So to cut a long story short, we tried one protocol that we found from a book, and it didn't really work for her. And that's another lesson, that everyone's different. We're all different. We've all got different biochemistries, different personalities, different spiritually even, maybe. And that all makes a difference on what you're going to react to, and how it makes a difference in what diseases you get in the first place, but it also makes a difference in how you might treat them successfully. So, Fiona's by no means recovered, but she's up and about. We were out shopping today. I'm sure a lot of her peers who are in the same MS support group, well, we know for a fact that some of them are now dead, and a lot of them will be wheelchair bound or worse. So I think one message I would give from this is that there's always hope. Mainstream medics might tell you that there's no hope and there's nothing you can do, but there's always something you can do. So that's probably enough of that for now. So I'll pass over to you, Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, you and I do discuss this and check in from time to time to see how she's doing. And we've discussed the fact that she was diagnosed a long time ago. And I know the work that you two have put in to try to have a longer wellness span, not only a longer lifespan, but a wellness span of her feeling well and being able to participate and enjoy her life. And I know that you've made, that was one of the reasons that you moved to the Canary Islands, was so that you could have better weather that would be a little bit easier for her to tolerate, as opposed to like some gloomy, cold, damp UK weather that is often found there. But I really wish that more people had your attitude, in that there is always something that you can do. Maybe you're not able to cure whatever you have going on, and we don't always know the quote root cause. One thing that I do want to say is I don't believe really in idiopathic disease. There is always a root cause. We may not know what the root cause is, and the human biology is very complicated. So it's not just what we have going on, genetic factors. There's a lot of other things that play into that, like you said, potentially epigenetics, diet, lifestyle, and anything else that you've been exposed to. And that may not be intentionally, right? Like, sure, diet and lifestyle, but if you're exposed to, X, Y, and Z, if you're exposed to a house or a workplace that has mold, that's not necessarily something that or that you are aware of always, that you're being exposed to that, or a situation that, maybe you have fungus, maybe you have a gluten sensitivity. There's all these things. And then we know that the quality of the food, like you try your best, but you don't always have the ability to necessarily control that or 100% know exactly what you're eating unless you're like really, really local and very familiar with who you're getting your food from. I think that people can go a long way there. And so that is possible, but it takes a really big effort. But ultimately, what I wanted to say was that there's so many factors that go into our day-to-day health, and it is physical in our personal body, it's our home environment, it's the weather, it's spiritual. And the other factor is if you were a believer in mainstream medicine throughout your life, and maybe you did take certain injections and things like that because you thought that you were doing the right thing, then those can all be factors to creating where we get. But like I said, I love your attitude that there's always something that we can do. I don't believe in idiopathic illness. I believe that we don't always know what the root cause is. And I definitely want people who are, I don't know if the average person will hear this or not, somebody who isn't on the same page as us as far as health and wellness goes. But I want people to know that you cannot trust the mainstream medical pipeline in this country. You have to, well, and globally, really, because you've been, it's a lot of the same places, right, that you're dealing with these issues, but it is a pipeline. And a lot of times there's a lot of different factors that go into this too, but you do have the hubris of the people that are treating you and diagnosing you that are not interested because of that hubris in having a conversation with you about what are some other things that you potentially could do. They're educated in a very, very similar way to one another, meaning that a lot of these schools, if they are an accredited university, that means that they answer to the same people. They answer to the same administrative or overwatch body. A lot of times it might be, here in the States, it may be the American Medical Association, or what have you. And then they have other links with huge organizations such as the World Health Organization. So they're going to be in a very similar way that we saw countries during COVID, they're going to be in lockstep. So it may give you this sense that you are getting the information because, well, I talked to this doctor and they said that, and I talked to this doctor and they backed that up. But really what you need to know is that you're in the pipeline and there's only certain allowable information that you're going to get from the pipeline, from the medical industrial complex and the pharmaceutical industry pipeline. And then I just want to give one small example. So Terry and I have talked about this in the chat before, but basically we have these common things that are told. If this is your situation, this is what you need to do. And a lot of people say, well, I went to my doctor, and I'll discuss thyroid as an example, because this is something that I have dealt with myself. So for example, if you go to the doctor and you are having some of the symptoms of a thyroid problem, such as hypothyroidism, which a lot of people have because the thyroid is under attack from the diet, food, water, air, injections, all these things, and they will test maybe 1, 2, or 3, if they're comprehensive, 3 aspects of the thyroid. So usually it's going to be your T3, your T4, and your thyroid stimulating hormone. And then they will get those results back. And oftentimes they'll say, well, I don't see anything wrong with your thyroid. But what they're not telling you or explaining to you is that the range that they are looking in is a range that is given to them. They're not thinking about what a healthy range should be for a person who is in this condition, who's this age, who's male, female, whatever. And so really, you may go on thinking that your thyroid is fine, but actually, if you had somebody who had the real information and who was looking at you specifically, then they may tell you your thyroid range is out of whack. Your thyroid stimulating hormone is way too high than what we would like to see for ideal health, not acceptable health within the medical industry. So, it'll be the same thing. Terry and I talked about this a ton during COVID times, as far as prevention, Now, we're not getting into whether it's real, viruses, any of that stuff, but we talked about having adequate vitamin D in order to fight off illness in general. Whether we're looking at germ theory, terrain theory, or whatever, we know that vitamin D and natural light exposure is a key component of health. Well, you can go to your doctor's office and they'll say, yeah, your vitamin D is fine. But fine for who? They don't even give you optimal ranges of what your vitamin D should be at. And then they don't tell you ways for you to increase your vitamin D. And they may even tell you a supplement. And we know they don't tell you to have sunshine, because the medical myth that sunlight is what causes skin cancer. But there's a lot of other stuff behind that as well. We could do an entire episode on the myth of sun exposure causing sun cancer. Anyway, back to you, Terry.
Thanks. Lots of good stuff there. Lots to talk about there. We should do a whole series on this. Pick up on some of the points you were making, which were really excellent. Of course, mainstream doctors are very much taken down the pharmaceutical route right from day one. And it turns out, this is something Fiona and I looked into more during COVID, that they're not really taught a lot of other useful stuff. They do very little biochemistry. They do very little on, they do like half a day on nutrition, I think it is. It's ridiculous. And yet, you know, arguably, and exercises don't really cover that very much. These things are the most important things for a good health and a good lifestyle, and they don't really talk about that at all. And to get conspiratorial about it, of course, it all dates back to the Rockefeller medicine and their Flexner report, which they set up in order to promote drugs which were made from oil, which of course they controlled, rather than natural health. And within very few years in America, a lot of the homeopathic hospitals and so-called alternative health centers were getting shut down because they just weren't getting the support. So they managed to capture the entire medical industry, really. And they set up their own, I think they set up the AMA, if I remember correctly. There was another body that was around at the time. They tried to get them on side and they weren't going to go along with it. So they said, oh, we'll just set up our own one then. And that's now become the dominant voice in US health, unfortunately. So there's that. What else did you mention? Oh, the thyroid, yeah. Fiona has also got Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So typically when you get one autoimmune disease, you get another, because they're probably all sourced around the same sort of thing, which I might mention briefly in a minute. You know, it's Western ill health is basically due to too much toxicity, bad diet, bad lifestyle, and toxic overload. And as you rightly said, those jibby jabs that people get often when they're young might have a lot to do with that, because you're exposing a very young, still kind of in training immune system to a big dose of toxins, which is deliberate. And they do that in order to so-called stimulate the immune system. But actually what it's doing is putting a great strain on a very young body. So with the conventional view of Hashimoto's, I don't know if this is a thyroid issue you have, but what they told Fiona is that they basically wait until Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease, so your antibodies are attacking your thyroid tissue. And what they'd like to do in conventional medicine is wait until your thyroid is completely, more or less, destroyed and non-functional, and then they're going to give you thyroid replacement hormones. But the problem with that is they don't give you the full spectrum. So rather than giving you, they used to give you like desiccated animal thyroid, which was a lot better actually, because there's probably a lot of stuff in this desiccated thyroid that they don't even know about yet because they're not aware of it. And then they just give you, I think they just give you T3 or T4, or maybe both. You probably know better than me, Ash. But Fiona decided she didn't want to do that. That seemed ridiculous. So she's tried to tackle it in her own way. And the last thing you were talking about, I think you were talking about like testing and sort of normal ranges. And this is a hobby horse of ours as well, because a lot of times you get a blood test and they'll give you a range for something, for example, I don't know, cholesterol, but it's not actually based around what is good for a healthy person. Generally, it's based around what the average is that they've measured amongst people, normal people they regard as normal patients. But the problem you have in the West is that a lot of people are actually ill and they have chronic disease and they might not even be aware of it. So you're measuring against a standard that's coming from unhealthy people. So a lot of the ranges, recommended ranges you see for tests, are based on bad data and or bad science. So yeah, that was just the points that came to me. So I'll pass back to you, see if you've got any comments on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. That's normally going to be the treatment that you get for a thyroid issue, is that they will tell you that you may be hypothyroid, which is not always associated with, but is often associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And it's exactly what Terry said. It's an autoimmune condition where you're producing certain antibodies that actually cause the body to attack the thyroid. So not only is that going to affect your thyroid function, but the thyroid function is so important for your overall optimal health. And they don't even give you a full spectrum treatment of treating your T3 and your T4. And even if they were to do that, the other thing that they don't do, sorry, my camera's moving, could be a kitty cat. But the other thing that they don't do is to give you a holistic approach that's going to that's going to support the thyroid function, right? So oftentimes you're going to need a B vitamin supplement. You're going to need to make sure that you are working on your gut health, because leaky gut can be a huge factor for that. And does that mean that you have a gluten sensitivity? Perhaps. So you're going to be needing to work on your diet. You're going to need to a lot of times give up the myth that sugar is your enemy. Sugar is needed by the thyroid, by our metabolism, to function at an optimal level. Now, I'm not saying sugar as in go get a box of Krispy Kreme donuts, but I'm saying sugar from fruit, sugar from juice, sugar from, let's say, if you have like a Mexican Coke or something that has real sugar in it, or if you're having um I guess those are the biggies, like juices, fruits. Oh, honey. That was the other big thing that I wanted to not neglect. Having some nice sugary, milky coffee, things like that. You actually need that. And a lot of people will think that sugar is the boogeyman here, but what is truly the boogeyman is processed foods and looking at all the stuff that they put in your food. And this is a meme online, and it will show a traditional packaging of food, and it's 1,000 ingredients. You don't know what it is. It's artificial dyes, it's all this crazy stuff. And then, but what we have been trained to point out and to look at is to think that the sugar in it is bad. So it's really a training that has taken place for us to think that sugar is the enemy, but actually you need that. And you should have a doctor that is capable of coaching you on that you can actually still have sugar, natural food, and a healthy diet and still lose weight if that happens to be your goal, as well as meeting your nutritional needs. And there's a ton of other factors that go into that. So oftentimes, and you and I have talked about this, in Ray Peat is who this work is based off of. And before that, it was Broda Barnes. And there's a lot of people who are familiar with his work, who study and try to carry on and practice in the way that Ray Peat recommended practicing. So one of the big things is sugar. But the other thing that will go in with our thyroid approach is the gut health factor. And like what Terry was saying, if we're having toxin overload, well, that means that our liver is not clearing toxins in the way that it should be. And oftentimes that's accompanied by gut dysbiosis, whatever form that may mean, whether it's leaky gut, whether you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, your acidity may be off. I mean, there is so many factors to consider here, but none of those factors are discussed with you by your medical practitioner. Never. So I think that there's a ton of interventions that can be done naturally, or even I'm not opposed to the occasional pharmaceutical. I take aspirin and I pair that with vitamin K, and I take that to help reduce inflammation. And that's part of, my regular kind of thing. I'm not scared of aspirin because I know that if you pair it with vitamin K, then you are getting a nice anti-inflammatory. I take a pure version of it, and then the vitamin K is going to help with any issue that I may have that may cause blood thinning or anything like that. So I balance it out. All of these things are things that you should be able to discuss and get from your doctor. But like what Terry's saying, I never have had a doctor in my entire life that is willing to have this conversation or who even has this kind of knowledge. And even if they did, you're not going to get all of this from a 15-minute session with your doctor, which is what they try to do to you. And so it's just a frustrating experience. And then to spiral kind of out from that, or to move out from that just in general, in the traditional usual healthcare system, you have to be in with a general practitioner, and then every issue that you may have, then they want to assign you to a specialist for every single thing. So if you have thyroid issues, then they want you going to an endocrinologist. If you have heart issues, they want you going to a cardiologist. You know, on and on and on it goes. And there's no limit to the amount of specialists that. My apologies. Can you hear me, Terry?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
sorry
fine.
about that.
Is that the cat again?
It could have been. I lost connection there. But basically, it's a never-ending spiral where people are freely given prescriptions. Often, you're given the guidance to have imaging for this and imaging for that and blood work for this and blood work for that, but ultimately, you may notice that there's never a cure in the traditional health pipeline because they're not in the business of curing you. They're in the business in prescribing you medication and having you come back every 6 months, every 3 months, every other month, every year. They want you in the pipeline. That seems to be the priority. And that's if we're looking at them in the best case scenario, is just that they think that's what you're supposed to do. Now, as Terry and I have talked about, we feel that there's a lot more nefarious deed happening in the medical industrial complex and the pharmaceutical industrial complex. Um, and before I hand it back over to Terry, I wanted to shout out our friend Jen, who is over in the chat on YouTube. And this is one of the things he was saying: the food issue is the most difficult. And I would agree with that, because if you're shopping for your food, even if you think you're just getting pure steak, we know that the processing of our food is not done in a humane way for the animal. And it often is like washed and this, that, and the other thing, and they're given this, that, and the other thing. So it's a challenge for sure. It can be done. And I also wanted to say that Jen and I have had a good amount of discussions about health issues. He has trained and practiced in acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, as well as herbalism. So I think that while it is not, those things are not something that I'm super familiar with, I think that we need to be thinking about what do other types of medicine and other approaches have to offer us, and what can they do to help us. Thank you, Jen. Back to you, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Jin. Jin's a very knowledgeable guy, knows a lot of good stuff about a lot of things. It'd be good to have him on talking about this sort of stuff at some stage, maybe. But my approach to food has been, to try and just eat real food, really, as much as possible. And you're always sort of advised to get the best you can afford. So, you know, you get your organic or grass-fed beef and grass-fed, grass-finished beef, I think is the best. Keelan and I were having a discussion about that, and he didn't agree.
Yeah.
But I think basically, if you're eating animals, you want the animals to be eating what they've evolved to eat, rather than what we decide to give them. You know, giving grains to cows is a very bad idea, because they have to ferment it, and it creates bad fats in the cows, which we then eat, and that creates bad fats in us. You know, and it's all about the omega-6 and omega-3 ratio, and you can get more omega-3s from a grass-fed steak than you can from wild-caught salmon. That's a fact I like to quote with people. So yeah, real food. Go around the edges of the supermarket. That's where you find the real stuff. Don't go into the centre where all the cereals and processed packets of food are. Lord knows I'm not perfect. You know, I fall off the wagon. I like sweet things as much as anyone else, and biscuits and what have you. And you know, I had my own health problems in the UK, which I might talk about in a bit. But the food is difficult, because it does get adulterated by big food and big pharma these days, and particularly if they're going to start injecting mRNA injections into animals, that's a bit of a nightmare. But hopefully there'll still be enough proper organic and naturally raised food around. Jin says he likes sweets too. Great. Hopefully there will always be enough real food around to keep us going. So you talk about pharmaceuticals. I'm definitely not against pharmaceuticals. One thing that was very interesting for us that came out during COVID was how great ivermectin is against all RNA viruses, even things like Ebola. People have treated Ebola very successfully with ivermectin. So we've stocked up on that. And I think if we got ill with something we suspected was a virus, we'd be taking that. And it seems to work for lots of other things as well. It's almost like a miracle drug. It seems to have some anti-cancer effects and works on a lot of other diseases as well. So I'm definitely not against pharmaceutical drugs. Although in the case of ivermectin, it's actually a form of something called avermectin, which is very similar to a product that's naturally produced by, I think it's a fungus that lives in the soil. I forget now. So the farmer's done the usual trick of just sort of changing it a bit so they can patent it and make some money on it, because you know there's no point in selling. There's no money to be made from selling things from soil. So and you were also talking about holistic approach. You know, thing we're desperately lacking in mainstream medicine is a holistic approach to medicine. And Fiona has to go to the hospital every 3 months for a blood extraction, because yet another thing she's got is called hemochromatosis, which means she has high iron. So she tackles that by having blood extracted every few months. And be a good thing if you're listening to this or watching it to maybe get it tested for yourself, because it's the most common genetic defect in the West, which means that high iron in Western people is a much bigger problem than low iron, which is the one you tend to hear about. And particularly since food companies have taken it into their head to supplement grain products like cereals with iron, which is not a good idea if you've got one or two of these defective genes. And Fiona's got two, so she has to have blood taken out every 3 months. And every time I'm in that hospital, there's two things that strike me. One is, you know, we live on a small island. There's only 86,000 people, I think, something like that. And the hospital is fairly big, and it's absolutely jam-packed every time we go there. And, you know, you automatically have the thought of, are they not making anyone any better here? You know, they just seem to keep coming back for more and more of the same. And it's like Ashley was saying, they'll send you to the cardiologist. They'll give you a drug for your heart. It'll have side effects of damaging your kidneys. So then they send you to a nephrologist to deal with that. And you might get another drug for that. And so you end up with this suite of drugs in your medicine cabinet. And there's never been any tests on having taken all these drugs together. So nobody knows what the effects of these things are. It doesn't seem like a great idea to me. And they treat the body like a car. There's, you know, you've got a bit going wrong here, you've got a wonky wheel, so we'll just fix that, and then that'll be fine, you know. But the body doesn't work like that. If you've got something going on in one part of the body, clearly it's going to affect other parts of the body as well, because it's all connected by the circulation, by the nervous system, and as it actually says, a lot of the health comes from the gut. So if you've got a bad gut, that's going to affect the whole of your body. I suppose that's all I've got to say. But the interesting thing about the gut thing is there's a strong theory that I like, that pretty much all autoimmune disease comes from the gut originally in a leaky gut. And a big culprit for damaging the gut is gluten, and particularly the sort of gluten we use in the West, because it's been bred to be very strong. So that means the bread you eat, not so much in like the rest of Europe, but certainly in the UK and the US, the gluten seems to have a very bad effect on the gut. And that's something I think I was suffering from. I used to get very bad asthma in the UK. And moving to a better climate helped, but also changing my diet helped an awful lot. And I don't really suffer from it at all now. So that's something to look out for. And unfortunately, that seems to have a combined effect with glyphosate as well. Glyphosate, which they use a lot on wheat, not to kill weeds, but they use it as a dehydrating agent to try and preserve it, which means they spray it on at the very end. So when you're consuming it, it's still there in large quantities. And it seems to have a combination effect with gluten in it and damaging the gut. And once you've got a leaky gut, all these bad chemicals can get into the bloodstream. And that's why your immune system will react against it, because they're seeing these things from food that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. And then that can cause what they call a leaky brain as well, which is the same thing happens with your blood-brain barrier. So these things can get through to the brain, and that can cause neurological damage. So that's why there's a theory that things like MS basically come from gut problems originally. So anyway, lots to think about there, Ash.
Absolutely. And Jen has written that gluten increases histamines, and that's exactly 100% right. And that's one of the things that Terry and I were talking about as well. And I was advised that gluten can make Hashimoto's worse because my thyroglobulin antibodies were increased. And basically they were saying if you're having gluten, even if you're not diagnosed with celiac, if you are having gluten sensitivity, and who wouldn't, if your health is already, or if your gut is already compromised because of xenoestrogens, too much estrogen, like what the other things that Terry was talking about that can compromise your gut health overall, then you're introducing gluten and you're having some kind of reaction, then it causes a chain reaction in the body and absolutely causes this histamine response, this inflammation response in your body. And like what Terry was saying, it makes you feel like you are ill because you are ill. You literally are being poisoned by eating this stuff. One thing that I also wanted to mention when Terry was talking about Fiona having to go every 3 months to have blood let, that there is an association with people that donate blood regularly, that they actually have an improved lifespan. So I think even if you don't have too much iron, that's probably a good idea for us to donate.
Yeah.
And that's on my radar to try to get very regular about that. As far as donating blood, but absolutely a compromised gut health from glyphosate, from, who knows what else we have in our environment. And a lot of products, not only do they have pesticides on them, but they also will cause an increase in estrogen. There's estrogenic substances that are sometimes in the water. There are medications that can cause an increase in serotonin and estrogen in the gut. So SSRIs are a big one of those. A lot of people think that depression is a chemical imbalance. I know I do not subscribe to that whatsoever. I don't subscribe to serotonin being the happy hormone whatsoever. I believe that too much serotonin and too much estrogen and the body not detoxing that properly are part of the contributor to why we feel bad. But the other thing, if you have the leaky gut from the poisons, from glyphosate, and the other thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned was seed oils in our food. So a lot of people, I think we have been hearing a lot more about seed oils being a factor in poor health, but I don't think a lot of people are taking that seriously necessarily. And it absolutely contributes to inflammation in the body. And that's one of the reasons that people will have that you are able to get really, really sunburned, is because you're not getting the proper light exposure, and you haven't given yourself an opportunity to sort of build that solar callus, or the base tan, as they say, but also because you are very, very inflamed, and having that inflammation from the seed oils causes you to be more sensitive to the sun. But what they don't tell you is that if you were to take vitamin E supplements, if you were to reduce and try to eliminate seed oils from your diet, and you build a solar callus, then you're not going to be burning at all with responsible kind of building up of your sun exposure, which is important for overall health. So it is all connected. The gut health is really important, and we have a lot of different factors that are contributing to our poor gut health as well. And yeah, so Jen agrees. He said that bloodletting is good. And yeah, seed oils are absolutely a real problem for us. And I 100% agree. I have really tried very hard to eliminate seed oils. It's not easy, but I think it's worth it. And it definitely, I'm not too keen on eating that stuff if I'm feel like I'm poisoning myself when I eat it. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, lots of good stuff again there. Just touching quickly on the serotonin thing, there's no evidence at all that depression is linked to a lack of serotonin. That was seemed to be fake science right from the start. I don't think there's ever been any evidence for that. So they just came up with this theory and came up with a load of drugs based on that theory, and I don't think it was evidence-based at all. And sure enough, some research is coming out now that seems to completely debunk that. So not a great idea. And not to mention that this is there's a guy I followed quite closely on Substack called A Midwestern Doctor, who I really recommend. He's well, I think it's a she actually. She's really great. But she comes up with a lot of evidence about SSRIs being linked to these mass shootings and suicides, and that is actually a known side effect of these drugs. So yeah, not a great idea. And Fiona took them for a while. There was seemed to be some evidence that it helped a bit with MS, and it may have helped a bit, but we decided in the end that the bad effects, the side effects weren't worth it. She used to get these very sharp stabbing pains in the head, which is another well-known side effect of these drugs. And anyone who's been on these things will know it's a heck of a job trying to come off them, because you have to taper down really slowly, because you get terrible withdrawal effects. So I don't think it's a great idea to dabble with these. And there's also research showing that things like walks in the countryside and just having a nice time, basically having a nice life, basically is a much better way of dealing with depression than drugs. Seed oils you mentioned, they are very difficult to avoid because people use them everywhere because they're so cheap. I often wonder whether the problem is with the seed oils themselves or with the way they're produced, because it's very difficult to get these oils out of the seeds because they're bound really tightly, so you have to process them with a lot of heat and a lot of chemicals, and that might be why these seed oils are so bad for you, because you'd imagine that eating the seeds themselves wouldn't be quite so bad, although from the plant's point of view, they don't really want you to eat seeds on the whole, so they often have chemicals in that are bad for you. So there's that. Fiona and I ourselves, we just cook with more or less all the time coconut oil, which is a really great oil to cook with because it's very stable under heat, and it's got lots of medium chain fatty acids, which are really good for you. And then I do the odd bit with grass-fed butter for like scrambled eggs and stuff, which is also pretty good stuff. and very, very occasionally a bit of extra virgin olive oil, but mainly coconut oil. So, and also when Fiona makes a lot of bone broth, so I can get some tallow from that, which is fantastic for cooking with, which is obviously RFK Jr.'s favourite. And talking about Fiona again a bit, she kind of beats herself up for all the mistakes she's made in the past. And you talked about one of them, Ash, was that she was told all the time to avoid sun. So she put all this sun cream on all the time. Living in Scotland, you don't get a lot of sun anyway. So her vitamin D levels, I think, were chronically low for most of her life. And that probably had a big effect on why she got ill. And unfortunately, she took a lot of vaccines as well, both as a child, when you can't do much about it, but also as an adult. Her first job was at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So she had to take all these kind of exotic vaccines for the exotic diseases she was working on, and she thinks that may have had a bad effect on her health. So, but you know, what can you do? You live in the West, and you're exposed to all these things. You basically know shit, don't you? When you're young, you don't know anything. So if we'd known what we know now when we were young, I'm sure we would have made a lot better choices. But it is very difficult. Over to you.
Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. And I do this sometimes too. I'm like, well, I took all of these shots, I trusted the doctor to give me an SSRI. And that is something that Jen and I was talking about in the chat, that the withdrawals for trying to get off of an SSRI are terrible. And we probably could do an entire episode, I know we could, on SSRIs alone. But I just will leave it at that, but maybe something that we can revisit at another time. But it does increase the body's retention of serotonin. We are told that that is what we're lacking. But as Terry said, it appears to be very much a junk science, and it absolutely contributes to potentially some very, very bad side effects for people while they're on it, never mind when you try to come off of it. And you think that the way that I'm describing it may make it sound like it's addictive, but it's not addictive in the way that you may think. Like, oh, I got addicted to heroin or something like that. It is not, you don't get high from it. In case anybody is wondering, it's not like that at all. It's just that, and I never felt better when I was taking one. Like, it did not help me. But when you're trying to get off of it, it still makes you feel terrible. So it's a really strange kind of dynamic, but it probably also goes back to the fact that if your gut health is not well and you're not detoxing properly because the liver and the stomach work so much together, then you're probably retaining so much of that serotonin that you really need to be flushing out of the body. So that's probably a big part of it. But then back to what you were saying, as far as if we knew then what we know now, I 100% agree. I wish that it wasn't that way. But like you said, I think that's how you get to be where we are, is aware of and woken up to the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industrial complex, is because we've had these different experiences, and we're paying attention to the patterns that we see, whereas a lot of other people don't. And we also have the desire to say, I don't buy this, So I think once you have a really healthy level of distrust in the medical community, then you're off to a good start. And I wish that it wasn't that way, but really it is a buyer beware situation. We really need to be paying attention to what we're doing and what we're participating in, and how much trust we are assigning to people that maybe we shouldn't have that much trust in. Now, of course, there's a time and a place. I'm not just trying to crap all over the entire medical industry, because there's a lot of value, especially if let's say you break your arm or something, like in these triage type situations, there's a lot of value there and a lot of health. So I'm not saying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but what I am saying is that you have to be an advocate for yourself. And if you have a loved one who is in the medical system for whatever reason, then you have to be an advocate for them too. Now, that's not always easy. Some people aren't willing to listen. And of course, people have free will. You have to let them do and trust doctors if that's what they're planning on doing. But I'm just saying that um, we really need to be advocating for ourselves and our loved ones. And then the other thing that I wanted to circle back to really quick, as far as seed oils go, I think my understanding, I'm not an expert, but is the polyunsaturated fats that come from the seed oils that are really the problem. And that can also take form of, like, if you have too much chicken, for example, if the chicken are fed soy and they're fed junk and things like that, and pork as well, if they are fed really literally garbage food, then they have the ability, or they do store those toxins in the fat in those animals of chicken and pigs. So then when you're cooking, you're releasing a lot of that in the fat. So this is one of the things that, like, a Ray Peat community advises to be really careful with your use of chicken. So maybe like once a week, try to make sure that you get like a soy-free fed chicken. And I'm not saying that I'm there. Like, I buy chicken thighs from the grocery store and I'm like, this is the best I can do. I'm cooking for myself. I'm trying. But as a goal, we want to be aware of like the quality of chicken and how often you're having it. And there's other things that they recommend as well. So like, you want to have liver once a week, you want to have oysters once a week, and then you want to be able to have beef. And of course, you want to have like the uh, beef broth or bone broth, excuse me. And you want to be getting a lot of good gelatin and collagen from what you're having. But I think the main thing is really trying to watch our polyunsaturated fats. And that one of the things that Terry and I were talking about, Dr. Mercola, seems like he may have gone off the deep end a little bit, but one of the things that he talks about is how in pork and chicken, even though they're not a seed oil, that they can still be high in something known as linoleic acid, which acts as a seed oil. So just something for us to be cautious for. Like I said, I'm not saying my diet is perfect or anything like that. And I'm just saying that there's a lot of nuance to what we're eating. So even if you were to just try to stick to like meat and vegetables and fruit or whatever, there's still something in the type of meat that we're eating. So I think that covered everything that I wanted to say there. A little bit on seed oils, a little bit on SSRIs, and then a little bit on regret. Because yeah, I do too. I wish that I never would have taken an SSRI ever. And I wish I never would have subscribed to getting into the medical pipeline as a way to try to address the issues that I had. I wish I never would have believed a vaccine salesman, but we just have to learn and move forward from there.
Yes, Fiona says that she thinks I'm a lot healthier than a lot of peers of my age. And she thinks that one of the things that has stood me in good stead is my general skepticism of mainstream medicine. And all the food advice that we used to get that I just used to ignore. They told us to stay away from saturated fats, which is another load of junk science, which we can talk about some other time, perhaps, because we won't have time now. But it was all based on a fake science study. And saturated fats aren't bad for you at all, in fact. And if you're eating grass-fed butter and lots of healthy pasture-raised meat, it's probably very good for you. So, and you talked about the sort of what I like to think of as the battlefield medicine. So yeah, if you break your arm or you break a leg, you definitely want to be going to hospital. They're fantastic at fixing you up for those sort of things. And I think it basically comes from the military-industrial complex. They've worked out really good ways of keeping their soldiers on the battlefield, so that if you have those sort of injuries, they're very good at fixing you up and getting you back on your feet again, so you're ready for battle again. So they certainly are. They certainly know what they're doing with that. But there's not a lot of other things I trust them for these days. I mean, maybe I'm a bit too skeptical, but I think that you'd have to drag me kicking and screaming into a hospital these days, particularly after COVID, when they were just seem to be killing people, for fun, left, right, and centre. What else did you mention? Chicken and pork. Yeah, Mercola does seems to have gone off those in particular. Fiona's a bit worried about eating those things now. I'm not so sure. I do enjoy them, apart from everything else, and I think it's very much linked with what they eat, as you were saying, Ashley. I think if you were, hunting in the woods in France and killed a wild boar and ate that, which had just been eating sort of stuff it found as it was rummaging around the forest, I think you'd probably be okay. And similarly with chickens, which they come from guinea fowls, which I think come from India originally. So if you're eating one of those that's living in the forest down there, you'll probably be okay. But the problem is, of course, they're getting fed all the wrong sort of stuff. It's a bit like we were talking about earlier with beef, when they're feeding them grain, which they've not really adapted to process very well. So probably if you get a nice free-range chicken or some free-range pork, and we used to get some lovely free-range pork from a farm near where we used to live in the UK, they were just living in the woods and eating acorns all the time. So I think they were having a nice life, which was also reflected in the fact that they were very delicious. So yeah, it's try and work out what your animals have been eating, and let's face it, if they've been treated well and out in the open and having a nice life, it's better for them as well, isn't it? And it makes you eases some of the guilt that you might feel from eating them. The last thing I was going to mention, I don't know if you mentioned this, but it's something that's that bothers me when I sort of encounter the younger generation in the West, either in America or in the UK or even here in Spain, is that how drugged they are. They've sort of been routinely prescribed mind-altering drugs to kind of keep them in line in school, and that a lot of these things, I can't help feeling, are based on fake diagnosis like ADHD or something. Boys are naturally more energetic, and they got a tendency to jump around at school and like to be active. And they don't really want to sit at a desk for hours just having some teacher drone on at them. So when they start sort of jumping around and acting up, they often get diagnosed with something like ADHD, and then they get drugged into submission. And I find it really upsetting. And it just seems to be that almost the norm now, that a lot of kids are just on drugs all the time. And it's kind of getting them very early into the pharmaceutical pipeline. Very disturbing. So there you go, Ash. What do you think of that?
Yeah, as far as what you're talking about with chicken and pork, I agree. If you know that that they had a good life, that they have a healthy diet, and they're not eating garbage, then I certainly think eating that sparingly with a good mixture of other stuff is a really healthy way to go. And one of the things that I was reading from Mercola talking about the beef and pork in regards to linoleic acid is that and especially like just the pork farms, I mean, not only are the conditions not humane, but they may be eating actual plastic, right? So, and the problem is that they are not a
Yeah.
ruminant animal, so they don't have the ability, even, and obviously you don't want your cows eating that either, but they have a less of a filtration system than cows have. So that's really when we can get some toxins excreted in the fat. And of course, we know that pork is a really fatty meat, so there's a lot of fat there and a lot of potential toxin exposure that you're going to have if you're getting like a mainstream line of pork. And there's a huge pork farms here in the eastern part of the state in the Carolinas, and it's not a great situation, and they're owned by like Smithfield, which is a Chinese company. So I would assume that they're supposed to have to live up to whatever regulations are here in the States, but I don't think that those regulations are actually helpful, and there's probably loopholes as well. So anyway, I just think do some digging into the polyunsaturated fats and the linoleic acid that you can get from beef and pork. Maybe if you're interested in trying to eliminate seed oils, then look at having that sparingly and try to source it from a place that you believe that they're having a soy-free diet and a healthier a healthier diet and life. Then the other thing that I wanted to address, what you're saying as far as medicating kids, it is heartbreaking because they're obviously, kids don't want to just sit at a desk. I mean, that's a lot of problem, or it's on the radar a lot in the Liberty community, is the Prussian style of school as one aspect of it. But then you also, not only do you have a Prussian style of schooling, but you have the modern day version of whatever that is. And we know specifically from people like, his name is failing me right now, but basically, it's not Carol Quigley. He based his work, John Taylor Gatto. So John Taylor Gatto and Charlotte Iserby, they did work on what the modern day school systems are meant to do. And it's not uplift and build mentally and spiritually healthy, educated people. That's not what it's there for. And I think any example of public schooling, like, we can tell that that's not what it's there for. And a lot of us have had really negative experiences in public school, whether that is seeing, your own personal experience, or whether that's observing what happens to other kids when they get put into that meat grinder. It's not good. And then you have the aspect of kids, yes, especially little boys. You don't want to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. They want to play, they want to interact, they want to be learning, running around. So it's really inhumane in that way. But then the most disgusting part is the system of the system in and of itself, of just trying to set up good little slaves. But then when they don't fall in line, when they don't comply, exactly what we were saying, Terry, then we want to give you medications. Then we want to give you literal meth to try to calm down a child. And it's really dark.
Yeah.
It's really nefarious. And then the other part about that really bothers me is that these people, whether they have good intentions or not, if you are one person and you have 30 children that you're looking after for however long during the day, then it doesn't really allow you to have a lot of extra time, space, and compassion to even learn what may be going on in this child's life. So you don't know if we're dealing with a dietary issue, a medical issue. Maybe they're not getting the food that they need. Maybe they're living in poverty. Maybe they have a really unstable home life. Maybe they're being abused. And the go-to is to drug them to get them to fall in line. It's really, really upsetting. And then the other thing is that if we're looking at a diagnosis of ADHD or something like that, there's a doctor out there who has a book called ADHD Does Not Exist. Now, he's not saying that the symptoms of ADHD doesn't exist, but he's saying that it's often misdiagnosed and kind of lumped into this one little category. But it could be a vision issue, like specifically, I think if like the eyes don't line up, so it can cause a difficulty and an exhaustion for people when they're trying to read. And so let's say you have a hard time reading, but you're not diagnosed as dyslexic or something like that, which that could potentially be part of it as well. But then, but they don't check that. So they just think you're ADHD, or it could be that you're on the autism spectrum. It could be OCD. It could be a whole myriad of things. Now, the other thing is that there's a lot of natural treatments for autism. There's a lot of similarities that these kids have in their, just in their chemical makeup, the gut health, all of these things. They may have higher fungus in the body, things like that could potentially be addressed, but it's not. It's just simply being masked. And the real issue is not even being identified. If it is dyslexia, if it is an eye vision problem for like the structure of your eyes, or if it's OCD or any of those things. So it's really, really nefarious, really disturbing that this is what happens to kids. And I do feel like it is a meat grinder that they're put into. It's a place that they go that if they're lucky, their spirit is not totally crushed. But more often than not, their spirit is crushed.
Yes.
And it's not simply the medication aspect of it, but it's so many factors there. Over to you, Terry.
Really excellent points you made about the kids there. And the things you were saying there, you could apply to most of mainstream medicine, really, that they see this issue, which is kind of like a symptom. There's no effort to investigate the underlying causes, which, as you say, could be from bad diet or bad environment at home, or toxicity at home, or exposure to mold, or all sorts of things. Vaccine damage, which of course will never be investigated. But they just sort of say, well, we've got this problem and we've got this kind of drug that we use for everything. So we're just going to put this in this bucket diagnosis of ADHD and drug this kid into submission. And then we'll be easy to handle in my class that's too full of kids, really. And I can't really cope with all the workload I've got. So it's easier if I just drug all these kids rather than, trying to do some proper education on them by splitting them into smaller classes or whatever. So I guess we should probably think about wrapping up. But if I was to come up with a few bits of advice on health, would be eat real food, get out into nature when you can, do some exercise in there, if ideally a bit of walking or running or cycling, whatever you fancy. And be skeptical about mainstream medicine. Do your own research, do a bit of reading, what Jimmy Dore would call a dangerous reader. Become a dangerous reader. They don't really like you if you do your own research. You have to bear in mind that if you do your own research and you come up with your own ideas at the doctor's surgery, you're going to be extremely unpopular. So you have to be able to face down a very hostile doctor if you want to get something out of the system, which is what Fiona's had to do from time to time. I suppose if you've got kids, think about homeschooling them. The school, as Ashley was saying, is a toxic environment. And if we had kids, we wouldn't be sending our kids into the public school system. So there you go. What do you think, Ash?
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. Jen said that he watched Jimmy Dore the other day, which I know he is a lefty, a bleeding heart liberal, but I enjoy the occasional Jimmy Dore as well. And he said, I was like, wow, I'm a 2016 libtard again. Oh, the good old days.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's really good advice, Terry.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice
obviously, if you have the means to be able to homeschool your children or to try to make it happen, even if it takes some crazy rearranging, I highly recommend it, because I think that it is not a healthy environment for your children. And I think that, as Michael Malice has said, public school is often the only place that a child may be exposed to violence. Now think about that, like how much you want to protect your children, and you don't want children being exposed to violence, let alone having violence perpetrated against them by people who should be looking out for them, but they're not. So it's a really risky proposition. And never mind, do you trust every single person around children that works at that school? How do you possibly know? So I 100% agree with that. And I, of course, agree with you have to be skeptical, because now that you are your own advocate, and you need to be able to be a lateral and a vertical thinker when it comes to addressing medical issues. And the most important thing is not to give up, because there's a ton of information out there. There's different philosophies. There's different things that you never know when that piece of information that's going to come together and tie things together for you is going to be there. So you have to advocate for yourself. You have to know that the information that you're getting from the medical community is limited. And that goes from the basic ranges of what is actually healthy from the blood work. That's a good place to start as far as being skeptical. And then, like what Terry was saying, absolutely try to eat the whole food and just gradually start reducing the junk, and don't expect yourself to be perfect, and don't put that pressure on yourself. But we absolutely can do things that put us in a better situation. And of course, yes, sunlight is a huge piece of the puzzle. Getting outside, doing things that you like. The other thing that I wanted to throw in that I have been doing recently is I've been trying to do my red light therapy every day. I know that's not for everybody, but
Nice.
I ended up buying a small little red light, so I've been using that every day, and then I've been trying to do my own lymphatic massage every day. And you may think like, well, you're a massage therapist, so it's easy for you, but actually there's a lot of tutorial out there. One of the big things that you can do is called the Big Six lymphatic massage. So you're just hitting like the big six lymph node stations in the body that can help get the lymphatic fluid flowing. And I am more and more leaning towards that is a very big underappreciated aspect of being able to improve your health quickly is through lymphatic work. So let's get those lymphatic nodes draining. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is, Jen said, don't watch mainstream media. Don't be stressed. Yes, I absolutely love that. And
Very
yeah,
good
red light is
advice.
the bomb. I absolutely love my red light. It's been worth every penny. I'm going to save up my money and try to get a bigger panel eventually, but what I have now, I really love it. And not only does it help with your overall health, like it is supposed to improve thyroid function. It is supposed to improve your appearance as far as like anti-aging. It increases or it improves and speeds up wound healing. It's very impressive. There's a lot out there for red light therapy to be able to help you. I'm a big believer in that. So, but the other thing, the lymphatic massage. So I just wanted to tell you that there's a lot of tutorials out there. Just look up Big Six lymphatic massage on YouTube or something like that, and you'll get some good information. And I think it can really help kind of detox the toxins. And the last thing that I wanted to say on that issue is that they actually in China, they were posting that they had quote cured Alzheimer's disease. But the kicker of that is because what they did in that surgery is they actually drained lymphatic fluid that was accumulating in the head and neck. So that is actually a factor
Wow.
of Alzheimer's disease. And maybe it's not everything that we've been told about it. So that you actually can improve your cognitive function by getting your lymph moving in the body. And so just wanted to shout that out to people just in case they were interested. And then I also want to thank our friends in the chat. So Jen showed up. He's been with us this whole time. We definitely should have him on for a health issue because he's got lots and lots and lots of good info. Thank you so much, Jen. Keel stopped by. We had Collecting Unfiltered News tube service that stopped by. Thank you so much. And then over in the over on Rumble, we had Knights of the Storm, my buddy Jason Barker, and we also had Birdhouse Blues stop by. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. We really super appreciate it. And then before we wind up or before we wrap up, I did want to let everyone know, check out our friends' shows. Check out Jen's show, Threshold Saints. Check out Knights of the Storm. Jason has recently asked me to come on, so I've been coming on his show on Saturday, and I have loved the experience. It's been really great, so check that out. And then I also wanted to shout out our friend Stella Q. Stella has her own deep dive weather education channel that she does with meteorologist Jeff. And, she's been basically studying and involved in the climate viewer group with Jim Lee. Her channel is called, it's her YouTube channel at Stella Q Australia, I think. But the name of the show is Whether or Not. So they do a lot of work over there. And anyway, so just try to support all these fine people. I really appreciate it. And before we go, Terry, do you have anything else you want to
add? Not really. Red light therapy is great. Also known as I made a near infrared sauna for Fiona. It got a bit damaged in the volcano, so I need to get it going again. The stand, which was a little shoe rack, got badly damaged, so I need to make another stand for it. But it is extremely good, and it's very easy to make yourself. Maybe we'll cover that in a future episode. We'll have a little DIY session on how to make one. It's using chick lights basically, and things you use to keep chicks alive. But the only other thing I've got to add is a question, really. How would our viewers and listeners get in touch with us, Ashley?
Well, Terry, I'm glad you asked. Our friends can get in touch with us at unionoftheunknowns.com. That is our Linktree page with all the myriad ways to get in touch with us. And that includes our Discord server, our email, voicemail, Twitter, and on it goes. You name it. So please feel free to check us out there. And we really appreciate everyone joining us in the chat and everyone who's listening after that. Terry, thank you so much. This time, hour and 15 minutes has gone by in the blink of an eye. A lot of fun talking to you about it. So thanks again, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Union of the Unknowns. You can find new episodes every week on all your favorite podcasting networks.